Alrighty guys, welcome back to the series. Now, this is going to be the last episode for the season, so to everyone that supported the season so far, thank you so much. It really means a lot to me, but we're going to end with a fairly complicated circuit. Now, I've already built the main module of it in front of me here, and I'm going to explain it as we go. Essentially, this is a 1-bit memory cell. Now, you might be asking if you've been following along in the series or you've got some knowledge already. Well, Spibs, we already have that in the game as a component, but let me just explain. So yes, of course, we have the memory cell, which describes itself as a 1-bit storage component. But we're going to use it in a fairly specific way, and I'm going to show you how the 1-bit cell works, and then I'm going to show you what a 4-bit cell looks like. So do your best to follow along with me. Of course, if you have any questions or you need to slow it down, then take your time, re-watch it. I'm going to do my best to explain it as cleanly as possible. So, we have our power source, right? It comes into the splitter and diverts it into 3 different outputs. So we've got the first output going into the power in of the memory cell. Now, we haven't hooked up the output or inverted output here. We're going to do that in a moment. But essentially, once we do so, this is the power that's going to be allowed to flow out. Next, we've got the timer hooked up. So when the timer is active, it's sending its power out through here into an electrical branch. A small amount of the energy is coming down here and into the input B of the AND switch. Now, to be honest, it really doesn't matter whether it's going into input B or A, but if you remember, an AND switch allows power to pass through only when both inputs are receiving power. So therefore, I'll just skip back to here. First, the third output is going to the switch here. So when both the switch and the timer is on, right, because the output of the switch here is connected to the other input of the AND switch. So when both these things are on, it is going to allow power to flow through and go into the set feature. Now, the set feature, if it has power flowing to it, will take priority over the reset feature, something you may not have known already. So even though the timer may be on, which the other half of it is connected to the reset, then if there's power flowing through here, it will take precedence, whether or not it's the higher amount of power flow or not. So let me show you what I mean. So I can switch this on, and you can see that the input A, because the switch is hooked up to that one, is lighting up. But of course, both power sources need to be on for power to flow through. So I've just got this timer set to 1. So when I switch it, it sets this to 1. Right? So you may be asking, okay, that makes sense kind of. How is this applicable? Well, if we had multiple of these, or even just the one like what's in front of us, you can think of this as a way of inputting data. And a way to change your mind before you perhaps maybe hit the enter key, so just like using keyboard. So you type what you want in, so this is one of our keys on a keyboard, let's say yes or no. We're deciding whether we want to turn it on or off. We've decided that now we want it off. And this is our enter key. So this is going to say, okay, yes, that's my decision, input the data. So we hit that, and it programs the memory cell. Because, of course, if this is off, and power is not allowed to flow through this because both inputs aren't being activated, then the other half of this electrical branch is allowing power to flow into the reset, and therefore since the set feature is not receiving power at all, then the reset takes priority and therefore it goes back to 0. Okay, So hopefully that made sense, and now you understand how this 1-bit memory cell setup works. Now, how are we going to apply it to in-game? Well, if I go ahead and connect the output of the memory cell, run it over here to a door controller that I've already paired to this roller door, then when we program whatever we want in, right, you can see I hit the switch, and although that means usually if it was hooked up to a door controller that it would automatically open, I still have to activate this. And then of course when I want to turn it off, even though this is in the off position, of course the memory cell is remembering its setting, so it's remembering that it's set to a value of 1, which outputs power through the output and not the inverted output. Power is still allowed to flow through there until of course we change the setting in the memory cell. If you're still following along, we're going to move on to the 4-bit memory cell now, which gets a little bit more complicated because there's a lot more wiring and a little bit more to explain. If you're not sure, go back and watch the video, see if you can make sense of it, maybe even build it yourself, or if you're still confused, write to me in the comments and I'll try and help you as best as possible. Now, I'd like to remind everyone, this is actually not my design. I got this design from Vice, who I'm sure many of you would have seen built or started building the computer in Rust. It was featured in one of the community updates, I believe. He is an amazing mind. I believe he's actually an electrical engineer, which obviously gives him a massive advantage over me. But I'm going to show you how I took his idea and just changed it a little to apply to what people might use it for a little bit more in Rust. Okay, so here we have in front of us a 4-bit memory cell. Now this is 4 memory cells all hooked up to each other in a way that allows us to program in. Now, in a moment I'm going to show you our keyboard, so to speak. But first we're going to have a look at how I wired this up. Now, if you guys want me to do a full instructional video on how to wire this up, I'm very much happy to. But if we think about how the previous one was wired up, then we can kind of apply it to here. Now I am going to run through very quickly, but I didn't want to waste too much time in showing the whole process. So we have our power source, which is 4 panels up the top. Now 2 of the solar panels, which are connected to a root combiner, are hooked up to one part of the circuit, which I'll explain first, and then the other 2, which are again hooked up to another root combiner, hooked up to a separate part of the circuit, just so we have enough power running to each part that we need to. Like I said, using the splitters instead of the electrical branch, sometimes you can have a little bit of power left over at the end, which can be a good thing, but can also be a bit of a disadvantage as well. Anyway, let's get into the wiring of it. Okay, so the first 2 solar panels I mentioned that are powering one part of the circuit are coming down here. It's coming into this splitter, is providing 40 power, and then this splitter is connected to each of these 3 splitters. So this output and then these additional 3 are all powering directly in to the power in of the memory cells. Alright, so that's what this cable is running along. Now if you haven't had much experience, I hope you have by this point in the series. You can of course overlap cables. So here is actually 4 cables running on top of each other. I just do this to make it look a bit neater. If I tried to run too many cables, this would be an absolute mess. The next 4 plugs, so this middle one is unused, the next 4 plugs here are used to power on the back here. These 4 switches up the top. Now don't worry about these 2 down the bottom. I'm going to explain a little bit later on what they're for. This is of course our timer, which we have set to 1. and these 4 switches are our inputs for the individual memory cells. So, additionally here, we have each of these connected to each of these. Now, what I did, running left to right, is connect them left to right, just to make it easier. So, for instance, this switch will be controlling this memory cell and this AND gate, right? And then, of course, left to right respectively, this switch will be powering or controlling this AND gate and this memory cell. Hopefully that makes sense. And now I'll move on to the... Okay, so the other 2 solar panels are actually connected to the power in of the timer here through the root combiner. This is simply because the timer needs to split the power that it's receiving into many different outputs. So here we can see the output leading through the wall just there. Now, just to be neat, I've run it in the back here. It comes along, runs all the way across into this electrical branch. Now, this electrical branch is essentially just halving the power that the timer is sending it. Alright, so you just have to keep that in mind. There's no correct setting unless, of course, the branch out is too low. So, the branch out here is connected to this splitter, alright, and this output is connected to the electrical branch. Now, you could use another splitter instead of the electrical branch if you really wanted to, but this just saves us a little bit of power and also a little bit of space. What this does, it gives us 4 outputs, which in this case is all that we need, instead of 6 or 5 if we use another splitter, sorry. So, this output is coming into here, which is then split into 2. The branch out is coming down here and along to in each of the input Bs. So the power out is also running into an input B, and then these 2 power outs on the splitter are running into the other input Bs. Now, how we hooked up the switches to these particular memory cells doesn't really apply in this case. You can do it in a sequential kind of order just to make it neat, but it's not actually going to make a difference in functionality. So now we know what both input A and input B are hooked up to. The other half of the electrical branch, so the power out, again, it doesn't really matter how you wire this up, as long as the amount of power going into the electrical branch is halved, it doesn't matter. But like I said, the power out socket is going up to the splitter here, and we're going to have the same setup. We're going to have an electrical branch to give us a total of 4 outputs instead of 3. We're going the branch out, and it's going across into the reset function of each memory cell. So we've got one going here, one going there, and then the other 2 from the splitter going into the reset. Now again, this doesn't actually matter which is hooked up. The only order that hooks up, just to make it easier on you, is which switch is hooked up to which AND switch. So let's have a look at how it works. I hope that made sense. Again, if you have any questions, I know this is a lot of information. Go back and watch the video, see if you can build it yourself, and if you're still confused, hit me up in the comments. Okay, so we've already seen how a 1-bit memory cell works. We saw if we flick on these switches, nothing actually changes with these memory cells here. Alright, we would have to hit the enter key or activate the timer to actually change anything. So if we turn them all on and hit, then we can see that all the memory cells are now on. Now if we switch them all off and don't hit the timer, we can see that they're still on, of course. So what happens if we do maybe just 1 and 2? Then we can see 1 and 2 are on. Now this is why I hooked the switches here up to the corresponding positions of these, just to make it make sense a little bit better when you're designing yours. Okay, again, how is this really applicable in-game? Well, I'm just going to wire a couple of things up. I'm going to wire these doors that you see here up to the outputs on the memory cells, and I'll come back in a moment and we'll have a look. Alrighty, so I've gone ahead and wired up the outputs of the memory cells to all these garage doors here. Now, what I've done, I've numbered the switches here which correspond, like I said, with the memory cells here, and just for demo purposes, labeled which one I've hooked them up to. Okay, so obviously if I flick this and activate the timer, then theoretically that door should open. So let's also kind of just presume that all these garage doors with the triangles are on the outside of our base. Let's say this 2x3 space is our base. I know it's not exactly realistic. And then leading out are these garage doors here. So I'm going to select number 1. And I'm going to select number 4, which is of course these two. When I hit the timer and I've made my decision, then these two doors open. And of course, what I've gone ahead and done is place turrets behind them. So say we're getting raided or we know we're being door camped. Alright, especially if you have these surrounding your base. Now, no one can come along and drain your turrets or anything like that, especially while you're offline or away from your base farming or roaming. But when you know that people are around your base, especially if there's maybe 5 or 6 squares of these out, so there's quite a buffer away from your base, then this can add quite a bit of protection here. Alright, if I change my mind, I want to do these ones and then open the other two, then of course I can program that in. These two shut and the other doors open. Now, I've killed everyone. Everyone's gone away, and I just want to shut these doors and protect my turrets again. Right? You might even have a compound built around these to protect them even more, but that's just a theory, so we can use it in a way. Now, like I said, I told you guys earlier to ignore these two switches, but I'm going to hook a couple of extra things up just to show you how we can even further the usability of this particular circuit and kind of the cool thing about it. So let me wire that up and I'll be back with you guys in a... So well done to anybody who's made it this far. That means I haven't completely failed in my ability to explain something that's reasonably complicated. Or maybe you're just sitting there going, well, if I keep watching until the end, it might make sense and he might click his fingers and the magic happens. But, like I said, if you're confused so far, go back and watch it, hit me up in the comments. I know this is a little bit funny. Anyway, the first and second memory cell now have a connection to the inverted output. There's a timer and a switch connected to it, so I'll show you these on the outside. Both the inverted outputs are hooked up to the power in of both switches. So this switch here is hooked up to, let's call it our front door. Alright, it's just going to control the door controller over there, pretty simple. This timer is hooked up to the gate over there, which we can of course pretend is on our compound or something of the sort. Now, this is just an example. You could hook it up to whatever you want. Let me show you how it works. What I've done is I've set a time of 15 seconds, so it's pretty self-explanatory. If I activated this switch, the gate would open, the timer would expire after 15 seconds, and it closes. Now, this could be handy in a group situation where you have teammates coming back, perhaps they're under fire, they're out of meds, they're out of ammo, whatever, or you're letting friends into your compound if you're a smaller group, or perhaps solo. Whatever the case may be, you can have whatever you want hooked up to it. So, now, how is this particularly useful and how is this different from anything else you could build? You could put a solar panel on the roof of your base, hook it up to a switch, connect it to a door controller, and voila, there's nothing different. But let me show you. So, if we understand how a memory cell works, depending on the programming, it's either outputting through the inverted output, if it's set to 0 or this red light is on, or it's outputting through the normal output, or if the value is set to 1 and the green light is active. So how is this useful? Alright, so we already know that these doors all have traps that are defending our base behind them. So therefore, if I've been using these switches on and off, right, and then all of a sudden something goes wrong, I start getting raided, or my friends get killed, or now there's people in my compound. Well now, especially if I use these two, since they're connected to the same memory cell, if I activate it, it automatically cuts power, and these no longer function, no matter how many times I try and switch them on and off. And it automatically opens my defenses. Now I can continue to open these doors and have it work. Just in case all of that went a little bit over your head, we're going to have a look at just the first memory cell. So all that's going to affect it is this switch and this switch. Now at the moment, this memory cell is set to 0, indicated by this red light being on. Therefore, power is coming into the memory cell and then outputting through the inverted output, which is then leading to this switch which controls that door controller. So I can simply flick the switch and control the door. Pretty simple. However, if for some reason I'm using this door controller and the door is left open, whoever comes in dies, of course I can just close the door again and hopefully their loot's safe. But what if they die on the outside and I want to help protect them, right? Or their loot. Maybe they're bringing me something for a trade, or they're part of my team, whatever it might be. So I'm going to open it just to show you anyway. Now if I flick this on, of course nothing happens because we haven't hit our enter key here. Once I do, what happens is this gets programmed to 1, indicated by the green light here, so therefore power stops flowing through the inverted output and switches over to the output. This, since it's of course hooked up to this switch here, which controls this door, means it's no longer receiving power, which cuts power off to this door controller. Now there is one small flaw with this, which could be remedied with a little bit of design tweaking, but I'll leave that up to you guys. However, I will explain what the flaw is. Let's say this is off. Right, so I haven't opened the door with this switch. I've just used the door like normal. I'm walking in my base and I die. It's not my friend or anything else, it's me. But I don't want to rush out in the chance that they go deeper into my base and get closer to my loot in an attempt to close this door. Now, since the door controller over there isn't receiving power, even if I switch this on and switch it, it will not automatically shut the door. It will, however, open the turret and protect me and perhaps allow me time to run out and then close the door. But you just have to keep that in mind. If you wanted that kind of setup, then you would have to do something similar to some of the concepts in the panic room designs in the previous episode and always have this on, or have the inverted output directly connected to the door controller, and therefore every time you reset this, of course it would close, but then every time you switch it back to the inverted output, the door would open and you would have to close it. Now this goes the same for the gate. Alright, that means you would potentially expose yourself and you would need to have a way of accounting for that or being prepared for that, like having teammates ready to close it or something like that. I hope that makes sense. Now really guys, if you have any comments or questions whatsoever, then please hit me up in the comments. I'm happy to answer any questions. And like I said, if you want a step-by-step procedure to build this 4-bit memory cell, which of course you could make it a 6-bit, you could make it a 12, it just gets more complicated as you go. I doubt you would need any more than that. Even this is a little bit overkill just because of how complicated it is. Keep in mind, as exciting as this might be to kind of show off to your friends, if you're that kind of person, having this in your base might be also a disadvantage if your friends don't know how to use it either. Because if they use it wrong, then they could, especially if you're using this system here, then they could potentially put all your loot and your base at risk as well. Anyway, guys, we'll wrap the episode up there. If you have any questions, hit me up in the comments. I know I've said it many, many times. However, if you dislike the episode, then hit that thumbs down. However, if you did like it, then it really helps me out. Hit that thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, follow me on Twitter. Any links that I have mentioned in this episode will be in the description below. Of course, the original design link will be in the description with the timestamp in it. It is quite a long video, but have a look. Go to the channel, check it out. He's really, really cool. His name is Vice once again, and we will see you guys in the next season, which is already in the works. Take